Hello, everyone, and welcome to 96 Boards Open Hours. This is episode 65. My name is Robert Wolf, and we've been coming at you live every week for over a year. I think we've only missed 2 episodes. Today, as most days, this is a very special episode. We are hosting folks from Redhat to talk to us about Fedora on 96 Boards. This is a very, very big movement in the 96 Boards ecosystem, the 96 Boards world. And we have some very important people here to talk to us in just a moment. But as always, before we introduce our special guests, I usually go through some bits of announcements here, and I have them all lined up here. I'll try to get through them as quickly as possible because I'm sure everyone is going to have a lot of questions around this topic. First things first, I told you I'd be reminding everyone about this every week. Lonardo Connect is right around the corner, starting on the week of September 25th, I believe. And it's a very interesting conference if you have the chance to get over there. Great chance to kind of get in touch with this whole Lonardo world. But yeah, the website should be shared in the chat in just a moment. Lonardo Connect, check that out. For those of you who are participating in Lonardo Connect, an email was sent out to everyone regarding demo days. So on Friday, every Lonardo Connect, we do some demos. Everyone that's there usually participates. It's a lot of fun. And if you have not yet filled out the form to get your demo showcase there, I'd suggest checking that out. Last week's video, for those of you who did not see it, very cool one. It was our first attempt, and pardon the technical difficulties, but it was our first attempt at interviewing someone in China, which proved to be a little difficult at the beginning. But at the end, I thought it was a complete success, very fun. We interviewed the folks from Black Whale. They did a really cool voice recognition application running on Android on the Bubblegum 96. And if you want to check that out, we will share that video also in the chat. You can, of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel while you're there. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers. I'm very happy about that. A new blog that was released by Mani, who's on the call here. He's going to be working on a self-balancing robot. So this is kind of the introduction blog to that. There's a bill of materials. And if you'd like to follow along with Mani in his process, you can, of course, buy those materials. And he should be releasing a blog roughly every week or so. I think there's going to be 5 parts tentatively. And yeah, you can have some fun building this self-balancing robot with him. Next thing. So I'm going to announce this at the very end of the show, but I did promise a winner for the Lonardo Connect badge. And this would be kind of giving at least whoever wins this a month and a half in advance to get their, tickets and everything rounded up. But I will be announcing the tentative winner of the 96 Boards Lonardo Connect community badge. Now, this is valued, I think, at like $2,500. So it's a pretty cool initiative. People who have been participating in open hours, forums, IRC channel, we're kind of rounding up all of these metrics and giving away a free badge to one person. And I'll talk about that towards the end of the call, maybe in after hours if we don't have time. A mezzanine mailing list, an old mezzanine mailing list has surfaced. And since this new mezzanine initiative has kind of started to grow, I would suggest checking out this mezzanine mailing list. We'll share that link as well. Please check it out, along with the mezzanine repository that our good friend Michael Welling is maintaining. It's actually starting to see some really good influx of some awesome contributors. In fact, a couple of them are here on the call. We have Rafael and Gustavo. Thank you so much for contributing the thumbs up for contributing the Altium template and a really cool board that we will be talking about on October 5th. So mark your calendars. We have that slot reserved for October 5th. We'll be meeting with this awesome team to talk about their efforts. Then the 96 Boards Wikipedia. I'm going to talk about this probably one last time. That's it. I've honestly been in their IRC channel talking up a storm, good nights, bad nights, but no call to arms. If you are familiar with the Wikipedia guidelines and you would like to contribute to the 96 Boards Wikipedia, according to their guidelines, I'm not asking you to go in there and, just make a mess. Go in there, respect their guidelines, and if you have any sort of contributions you can make, it is much appreciated. They put it up for deletion. We want to get that kind of taken care of, not deleted. Now, all of those announcements aside, I have a few more at the end of the show. I think that that's enough. We're ready to move into our segment. And the segment is, as mentioned, Fedora on 96 Boards. Who do I have joining me? Peter and Paul, right?
Yeah, I'm Paul Whalen, the Fedora QA lead for ARM and AR64.
And
Paul,
I'm Peter Robinson. I'm the general Fedora ARM lead. I wear numerous hats. My official role at Redhat is IoT platform lead, and basically I'm a jack of all trades across the entire Fedora project.
Great. So thank you guys very much for joining us. Very grateful. I just want to remind everyone who's listening, feel free to speak up. Again, you can comment in our chat window. You can just interrupt us at any time. It's not very informal. You can also write in our IRC channel, which is #OpenHours. So guys, real quick, maybe we can go with you first, Peter, or Paul, whoever. Let's start with you, Peter. Could you maybe kind of give us a little bit more of a background of yourself? Maybe take like 30 seconds, maybe something you like to do for fun. This is maybe a silly thing, but tell us about yourself.
Right, so I'm Peter. I'm originally from Australia, although I've been a Londoner for 12 years or thereabouts. I grew up on a farm, and so didn't really get into computers until I was in my late teens, and used to spend a bunch of my younger childhood riding horses, motorbikes, driving tractors and trucks, and doing all the farmy sort of stuff. I'm the middle of three boys. My other two brothers are farmers on 10,000 acres in country Western Australia. I have been at Redhat for 5 years. I've been doing this ARM embedded thing for about 7.5 or 8 years. I got a BeagleBone XM originally just to scratch an itch and play around with, and it's sort of like I ended up bootstrapping a whole bunch of stuff in Fedora, and the rest is history, I think. So on the weekends when I get the time and I'm not sort of playing around with ARM stuff, I like to sail. So that's pretty much me in 30 seconds or so.
Nice. No, that's really cool. I actually have a bunch of questions on your personal life, but we'll go into that after maybe. Paul, you're up.
So I got involved with Fedora ARM probably around 2009. I was in college and we built a Koji build system, so started bootstrapping the previous ARM v5 effort that was defunct at the time. So we picked that up at the college and we started working on that, later adding ARM v7 and eventually AR64 when it came into fruition. Was hired for at Redhat in about 2012. Been working on the Fedora ARM effort since then. On the weekends, I'm an avid cyclist. However, I don't have time lately. I just welcomed my first son into the world and been tied up with that since.
Awesome. No, congratulations on that, by the way. Kids take up all your time. So thank you very much for sharing that. Appreciate it. The big question I think that we have to kind of address before going into, and I know you guys want to get into the whole technical aspect of everything, but the big question is, I think we need to answer, what is Redhat? What is Fedora? How do they relate to each other? And maybe you can give a little explanation there, top level. We don't want, I've understood that this can kind of go on for a long time, but let's just kind of summarize.
I would hope everyone knows who Redhat is. If you don't, we're a relatively large Linux ecosystem player. We have a product called Redhat Enterprise Linux, which is one of literally hundreds of products these days. If you go back 15 or so years, there was literally RHEL and one or two other surrounding products. But now we're a lot more than just a Linux company. We have large middleware stacks that are supported on operating systems other than Linux as well as Linux. But ultimately, we're probably the largest open source company in the world. We do a lot of our development of new products in the open. The vast majority of our acquisitions, or all our acquisition source codes, eventually get open sourced. And we're a company that is now about 12,000 people operating right around the globe. Fedora is an open source community-led distribution, which is sponsored by Red Hat. Red Hat employs a whole bunch of people to work on Fedora, and it is the upstream for RHEL. So a lot of work goes into Fedora. It's tested out to see how well it works. We use the latest and greatest compilers and tool chains and various other bits and pieces. And sort of it goes into there and gets dog fooded. So like GCC, for example, will normally release their new versions, and Fedora will generally be one of the first distros to pick it up and test it as it's going through pre-release stages to see where all the gremlins are and help basically the upstream toolchain teams stabilize that as a general thing. So we have GCC 7, and that was quite an interesting release when it landed into Fedora as part of Fedora 26. But on the flip side of that, we get all the latest and greatest optimizations, which for the newer style architectures such as AArch64, it's great because you get a lot of the performance bumps early and often. So I think that gives a fairly decent overview, but obviously there's always questions, so feel free to ask.
Absolutely, and it looks like Tyeth made a comment here. You referring to Red Hat, saying that you referring to Red Hat made Linux popular before Ubuntu did. And now, I don't go into the open source that far back, me personally, but
yeah. So personally, I started using Red Hat Linux back in '96. It was the first distribution I touched, and it was a lot less smooth than it was these days. I can remember one of the first things I had to do after I installed it was download a kernel and recompile it so that I could get network support for my network card, and then connect to the university network in order to download new stuff. So, I mean, Red Hat Linux has been around for a long, long, long time. I'm not sure when Ubuntu started, but I seem to remember it was the mid 2000s. So where Red Hat Linux, I think, has been around since around 94 at a guess. So I started using it with Red Hat Linux 4.0, so a little while ago.
Nice.
Is Mad Dog on the phone? Mad Dog could give us some history here.
Oh, Mad Dog could give us lots of history.
I think Mad Dog is actually on travel right now, unfortunately, and this would have been kind of a perfect episode to have him on, but yeah, sorry about that. We will have to touch on this next week or the week after when he does join. So great. Now I know, again, we're going to get into this technical stuff, but I want to still kind of dig our way down, right? And the next question I would like to ask is who would Fedora kind of cater to, right? So in the sense is it like let's phrase it like, who is Fedora suitable for, and who should be using Fedora, for instance?
Everybody. It's
good answer.
Yeah, I mean it's a very wide ranging. I mean, we have a lot of contributors in Fedora, everyone from your general sort of hobbyist that uses it at home on, everything from old laptops to Raspberry Pis and similar sort of style devices, right through to say IBM and similar related that run and use it and develop with it on their latest and greatest mainframes and chips and things like that. So it's and the first 2 years I was at Red Hat, or my first 2 years at Red Hat, I was in the EMEA consulting team, and we had customers that were using Fedora alongside RHEL in high-frequency trading platforms, and I've seen Fedora run and used in some very interesting and wide-ranging locations and places. And I mean, it's a fairly fast-moving distribution in that we have 2 releases a year, and so they're generally aimed at May Day and Halloween releases, although we do have a history of slipping. But it's, with tools like Ansible and config management tools and things like that, we're increasingly seeing more and more, people using Fedora because it fits their sort of wide-ranging needs. And I know of companies that are running, Fedora on hundreds of thousands of ARM devices, and so it's. I know of it running on HPC and various other bits. So it's very wide-ranging. It has everything from desktop through to all sorts of other special interest groups. So it's it will quite happily run from anything from a small ARM device through to a mainframe computer.
Awesome. No, yeah, I think that covers it all there. You did mention that people are running Fedora on hundreds of thousands of ARM devices, right? So this kind of leads into my next question, and I'm curious as to what hardware is actually compatible right now, and I feel you kind of answered this with Fedora images, but yet I'm still kind of please, sorry.
So the Fedora ARM images for ARM v7, so the 32-bit, we actively support and test around 50 different devices, but it should work relatively well on around 250 different devices. Obviously, I don't have that many devices. I've only got a mere nearly 100 different ARM devices in my flat, and I test as many of them as I possibly can. But sometimes there's only so many hours in the day. Paul, obviously, as the ARM QA lead, tests a whole lot more. We're starting to do more and more around automated testing and CI and things like that. But it regularly astounds me the number of people that just show up on the mailing list or IRC or what have you and say, hey, I just downloaded and flash your image onto random device X and it just worked. It's excellent, sort of thing. So from that perspective, there's lots and lots of different devices there. Obviously, the Raspberry Pi is a relatively common one that gets asked about, and we officially started supporting that in Fedora 25. We'll obviously be supporting the 96Boards and some other 64-bit AArch64 devices in Fedora 27. There'll be, in fact, the Hikey I know works in Fedora 26 with the Tiano Core firmware on it, and there's been a couple of people that have tested and played with that quite extensively. But ultimately, in Fedora 27, we'll start officially supporting 64-bit single-board computers with some of the 96-board ones high up on that list.
Awesome. You actually seem to be leading in right into my next question every time. But so real quick, I just want to kind of give a chance to anyone who's here. Did anyone have any questions as of now? And sometimes I know it kind of feels rough to interrupt us, but if anyone has any questions, please speak up. All right. So then basically we were leading into 96Boards and you did it perfectly, but so these images for 96Boards, Fedora, you're saying Fedora 27, this is the time when 96Boards will start seeing some movement, right? But my understanding is that you've already been working on this and quite possibly could have some images before that.
Yes. So in the lead up to any release, we actually we do nightly composers of the entire distribution. So in a couple of weeks, and I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head, Paul probably knows the dates better, we will be branching in preparation for Fedora 27, at which point Rawhide, which is our sort of development head, becomes Fedora 28 or what will eventually become Fedora 28. And at the moment, we're doing nightly Rawhide composers. It's in a bit of a churn at the moment because there's just been a mass rebuild to enable some new toolchain features and a few other bits and pieces. So that should settle down in the next few days with luck. And so we will have sort of nightly releases. I've still got a little bit of polish to do around the 96 board stuff. There never seems to be enough hours in the day to do that. One of the other challenging but enjoyable sides of Fedora is that Rawhide at the moment literally is following on a daily basis Linus's 4.13 development kernel. So basically there's a new kernel build each day for Rawhide, which is the latest pushes of Linus's kernel. So especially in the lead up to RC1, where everything's a little bit in flux, that can always be a lot of fun. And I end up chasing my tail quite a bit, dealing with some of the ARM issues. So that should hopefully, now we're around RC4, should start to settle down now. And we should be able to, in the next couple of weeks, have some nightly images for people to start to play around with.
Awesome. Awesome. So now with these images, you know, traditionally from what I've seen in 96 boards, because you have the SD card slot, you have the built-in eMMC. Are they going to be more so boot from SD card, boot from eMMC, flash eMMC images? I know it doesn't matter so much, but
initially we'll be aiming for SD card or USB stick. I haven't had time at the moment to look at, because of the overlap between the firmware and the rather strange Android style partitioning that's on the eMMC. I've not yet looked at what it will take to easily support that. So in the short term, it'll initially be USB or SD card. In the medium term, we'll look at how we can support it on the eMMC.
Awesome. Okay, so now I got a question in the chat, so we'll address Todd Thal's question first, I guess. So how much difference is there between FC26 versus Redhat 7 Plus, which is based on FC19?
A lot. So I mean, Rel 7 is evolving a lot quicker than some of the older versions of the enterprise distribution. And generally in a dot release of Rel 7, we're actually seeing more features land and more rebases in the enterprise release than we did, say, between Rel 5 and Rel 6. So it's relatively fast moving. Some things are quite similar. For example, Network Manager is the same version that shipped in the just released 7.4 was the same version as shipped in Fedora 26. So in some areas, they rebase a lot more aggressively than they used to in Rel. But to be honest with you, I'm primarily focused on Fedora, so I'm not really aware of the exact details of what's in Rel 7.
So it looks like, though, I read up a little bit about this, and it looks like Fedora is kind of a staging area in some sense for some features that then get fed into Redhat images, right? Redhat enterprise images, staging area.
It is a staging area for all features that land into Rel. Everything goes into Fedora first.
There you go. So then now I would like to kind of know, and this could be for anyone here that's listening, how could someone get involved with these community builds, Fedora? Like, are there any resources that you could provide, places for people to go that they can learn how to join this community?
The best starting point is always the Fedora wiki is always a great starting spot, and I'm just getting the link for that. The various different ARM channels, so that's the wiki. The ARM landing page on the wiki is here.
Add that there are also some IRC channels for those who are interested. Fedora ARM, Fedora-ARM, and
so there's Fedora ARM, and there's a whole series of pound Fedora, and there is also a getting started page, which is, I should note,
Yeah. So we can. So if anything, Peter, what we can do is you can share these resources with me later. I would like to write a small blog about this episode and include the things we're talking about.
Excellent.
If that's okay. Yeah. So I mean, it's fine if you
Absolutely.
don't have access to the stuff right now. But so next question here I have, and this one is a little bit more related to now we're kind of starting to dive a little deeper. But could you talk a little bit more about the Fedora package management system, with relation to what other people might be used to who have never used Fedora using, Debian based?
Sure. I mean, I'm sure most people know of RPMs. They are basically the binary package equivalent of debs. We have a package manager that sits on top of that called DNF, was previously Yum, as a number of people may be aware of Yum. And that does a lot of the sort of depth solving and things like that. So you can basically just say, DNF install Node.js, and it will pull in all the dependencies and sort that out, similar to apt-get in the Debian-based distributions. So that's a brief overview there. Of course, we also, in the main Workstation edition, which is based on GNOME 3, there is also the GNOME software, which gives you a nice GUI installer with all the details, and also does things like applying security updates, and even integrates with, depending on the device and the manufacturer, will integrate for firmware updates and BIOS updates and all sorts of other fun stuff.
Awesome. So I know that I'm kind of looking at my sheet right here that I have for making sure I'm on track with everything. But I know that Monty had talked to me yesterday and said he had some questions for you guys. So I'm going to kind of let him speak up here.
Sure. So Robert, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, sure. So all right. Thanks, Peter, for your explanation. So I got a couple of questions for you. So first one is that can we install other open source tools like device tree compiler, U-boot tools on Fedora images?
Absolutely. So in the ARM images, we actually ship the device tree compiler and U-boot tools out of the box in all images, including the minimal one. The Fedora package set comprises of around 18,000 source packages, which when compiled to binaries equates to, I think, around 80,000 different packages. So there's a lot of packages basically in Fedora. And in terms of ARM for both 32 and 64-bit, we have the vast majority of those available exactly as they are on x86. Of the 18,000 odd source packages, I think there is less than 100 that don't compile for, say, AART64, for example. They tend to be a lot of the sort of older corner case sort of packages that tend to be not widely popular anyway. But everything from like the vast majority of tool chains such as Golang and Rust and various Python, Perl, etc., are all available. So pretty much anything that you would get on x86 Fedora, you will get on ARM Fedora as well.
All right, thank you. Yeah, this is actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because we use these tools a lot. So that's what which actually comes to my mind when I talk about Fedora images. So yeah, the next question is you already talked about the kernel revision. So which kernel revision are you using on the latest Fedora image?
So Fedora 26 currently has, I believe, 4.12.5 is on its way out. I don't know whether it's in the stable repositories yet, but it's in the updates testing repository. And the Fedora kernel team actively rebases the stable releases to the latest stable kernel pretty quickly. the general rule of thumb for a Fedora to be rebased onto the new stable kernel is about the .2 release. So, generally around, say, 4.12.2, they will start to look at pushing out the latest kernel. And then, obviously, Rawhide, which is the development version, will be on basically the latest, or pretty close to the latest Linus head in the development cycle.
So Haj just commented on here saying 4.11.11 was on his machine that fed 26.
Yep. Yeah. So that's probably the latest one in the stable repository. And then I know Fedora 4.12.5 is built because I'm running that one across all my ARM devices because that's what I've been testing to make sure that we don't regress. So 4.12.5 should be on its way out to at least the testing. So Fedora has its stable updates and then testing updates, which are the new ones going out. And so the 4.12.5 kernel is pending in testing. So, in the next couple of days, I would, or by early next week, possibly the 4.12.5 kernel will be pushed to stable in Fedora 26.
Okay. So so the next question is, do you have different kind of images like the developer version of Fedora image or the image with desktop version? Do we have some kind of differences there, or is it a single image only?
No, so for ARMv7 at the moment we're producing, I think, around 20 different images. So we have a base minimal image, a server image, the GNOME workstation image, and then a bunch of different desktops. So there'll be, off the top of my head, XFCE, Cinnamon, KDE, LXDE, LXQT, Sugar, and potentially some others. And then there's also some other type of images that are known as lab images that are around focused on various different topics that special interest groups are interested in. So there's things like a special image for design tools and Python. There's a Python classroom image. For the 64-bit ARM ones, we're currently producing server, workstation, cloud, and minimal because they're not officially, obviously they'll start to be supported in Fedora 27 and we'll expand out to a lot of the different images as we get time.
Okay.
So, Mani, real quick, I want to give a chance to Amit Pundir to ask a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, cool. He's pinging in IRC, that's why. So I'm trying to watch both here. So, Amit, did you want to speak up real quick?
Yeah. Hello. Hi, Peter. I just wanted to ask about your experience working with 96Boards. I mean, considering you have 7-8 years of experience working on ARM boards, how easy or how difficult was it to port this Fedora on High-Key or whatever board you have?
And I want to add.
Sorry, go on.
I just want to add to that. Also, if you could also maybe state how it could be made easier.
Yes.
So the big one. So the two big issues I've had was one. So Fedora has a policy of upstream. We don't pull in a lot of kernel patches. We don't use vendor kernels. So I suppose the biggest issue in the sort of early time of the 96 boards was that a lot of the stuff wasn't yet upstream, which made them very hard to support. And that's certainly improving a lot. And the second one was around things like firmwares and boot code. things like, the Dragon board was a very focused, firmware towards Android and that style of OS. So for the 64-bit ARM boards, we support UEFI as the boot method, and U-boot now has a means of emulating that. And a couple of the Suzy guys did the initial work on that, and Rob Clark from Redhat, along with a couple of other Red Hatters, have actually expanded that in the last month or so quite considerably, so that we can basically run a vanilla upstream grub to boot. In the case of the Dragon board device, there was some firmwares needed around the display and graphics offload things that weren't redistributable. And to get them, you had to go through a Qualcomm page. Those issues now look to be resolved with at least the Venus, and I believe some of the other firmwares now landing upstream in the Linux firmware repository, which basically enables us to redistribute them without having to deal with lawyers. But I mean, those issues aren't limited to 96 boards. We had issues initially with, say, the Raspberry Pi and the special firmware that it had, that it wasn't redistributable, and had to engage with Red Hat Legal ended up engaging on my behalf with the Raspberry Pi Foundation and Broadcom to sort out an agreement so that the Raspberry Pi firmware was generally redistributable as well. So, I mean, a lot of those issues aren't necessarily, particularly unique to the 96 boards, but they certainly have been some of the stuff that limited our initial early support for them.
That get you, Amit?
Yeah, thank you.
So it's a bit of a pipe dream, but I mean, maybe one day Fedora could just be across all ARM devices.
Oh yes, one day.
Super simple.
Well, I mean, compared to 7 or so years ago, where we supported like 2-3 devices, each needing sort of different kernel builds and things like that, we've come a hell of a long way. Fedora engaged with upstream U-boot to implement a process called distro boot, which with ARM v7 was initially implemented with ext Linux support, and that was actually a big fight we had with the upstream U-boot guys, because they were like, who would need this shit? And eventually they came round, and surprisingly, we actually had NVIDIA step in and help us a bit there. And eventually upstream came around and we're like, oh, this is actually a really good idea. And now they expect any new device that's added to U-boot to support distro boot out of the box. And you're starting to see more and more devices ship with SPI flash on board for the firmware. And, in those cases, if they've got a new enough upstream U-boot, we can, in a lot of cases, we can sort of DD out one of the Fedora images, plug it in, and it will just boot. And it's surprising the number of people that come up to me and say, hey, I found this new random, device, and, I just DD'd it to the board and Fedora just booted on it. And 7 years ago, that was unheard of. And today it's, a lot more the case. And with initiatives like the ARM server initiative stuff, so SBBA and damn acronyms, SBBR and SBSA compliance, on the enterprise side of stuff, there's devices coming along that Fedora already runs on out of the box. So we're getting there, certainly. And there's been a lot of effort upstream, a lot of engagement from people at Red Hat, people at Lonardo, like Arndt and the Lonardo kernel leads that have been doing things like multi-platform kernels. Fedora was actually the first distribution that enabled and supported the multi-platform kernels around 3.7, and we went from building, I think it was 5 different SoC vendor kernels in Fedora to a single kernel within the sake of a couple of kernel releases, and that made our life a lot easier. And it's now Debian supports it, and the SUSE guys support it, and Arch and things like that. But a lot of people don't realize that Fedora was actually, and I worked very closely with the Lonardo kernel people to test that and enable that. And this is stuff now that's we went from supporting, like, I think it was 5 or 6 devices with 4 or 5 kernels to now hundreds of devices with a single kernel, and that's kind of cool. So
that's really cool.
It's we've still got a long way to go, but occasionally I allow myself to look back in the rear vision mirror and go, holy hell, we've come a long way. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of cool.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really cool. 1 kernel. Yeah. So, I mean, it looks like Todd Thal had a question in here, or 2 questions. I don't know, Todd, do you want to kind of go a little deeper on what you're trying to ask?
Just briefly, from like it seems from the way early days, even before Linux actually even had X Windows, you always saw it used to be a place called Prep MIT EDU. This is like years ago. The speaker may recall this. A lot of the GNU series, I think, who was the guru out of MIT that I always supported, basically all the GNU software and things like that. So like the chain utils, the core utils, et cetera, et cetera. Do you always have them in all the distros, and are they always up to date, et cetera?
So we always have them in Fedora, and they are always up to date. And so, so the new tool chain such as binutils, glibc, GCC, all of that is what Fedora is built on. Red Hat employs a number of people that actively work on those projects upstream. But, like Fedora is, I mean, we have 4 main sort of words that describe Fedora, which is first, freedom, friends, and another F word that I can't think of the name of.
Yeah, okay, I just remember Richard Stallman, that's who I remember. You're probably quite familiar with Stallman.
I'm aware of Richard Stallman, yes.
Well, just so I want to get kind of a begging question. You claim you're just kind of explosively getting all these new ARM architectures you're needing help with. Are you guys hiring?
Yes, jobs.redhat.com. If there's questions you're interested in, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm quite happy to discuss what opportunities we have or what it's like to work at Red Hat. For me, I've been here just over 5 years, and I've had 3 different roles in Red Hat. It's certainly interesting, and there's certainly a lot of opportunities. So yeah, absolutely, we're always hiring.
Monty, you better not be going there.
I'm very happy with Lonardo.
Okay, good. Yeah, no. So
we work closely with Lonardo.
Yeah, Todd, did that answer your question at all? I wanted to bring Paul into the mix here real quick. I mean, we got about 14 minutes left to the recorded call.
Sure.
Did that get? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So
with all the latest technology, you just need to clone Monty. Make a clone for Lonardo and a clone for Red Hat.
There you go. Yeah. So, Paul, real quick. I mean, we kind of brushed over this, I guess, in one of Peter's answers, but he kind of referred to QA and how you're in charge of QA, and I kind of want to get a little bit more of an insight, maybe in the day of the life of Paul Whalen, with regards to Fedora QA. Maybe talk about your efforts there.
Yeah, it's definitely got a lot easier. As Peter was mentioning, we had a variety of kernels and different images for different boards that had to be tested. Now we've got one image that works across all the different boards. So that makes life a lot easier. We've gone from having a tarred up root file system that you have to provide your own kernel to boot, now to providing everything. So it's a lot easier to test, and you have an idea of what the end user is going to experience. We've primarily focused on testing on actual hardware initially, then started using some custom scripts to run sort of installation and image tests here in QEMU and libvirt. Now, heading towards F27, we're looking at using OpenQA, so to do a lot of the installation testing, graphical installation testing through automation, where it compares a picture to a successful installation and make sure that that's exactly what's happening on your screen. That's going to make life a lot easier in Fedora 27. By all means, and we still do need to test on actual hardware, though, of course, to make sure all the different boards are working as expected. There's no sort of problems with any of the graphical or sound or anything like that. So we have a weekly meeting on Freenode. It takes place in Fedora Meeting-2. We've also got a mailing list, which is arm@list.fedoraproject.org. We announce when nightly images have been nominated for testing, so you can take part, test the image on your favorite board when we do support 96 boards. Report back to us. Let us know if you're hitting any problems. You can file bugs in Bugzilla, so bugzilla.redhat.com, and then we can action them and make sure that what you care about is working. If there's some tool that you want to ensure is working on your hardware and it's not, let us know. We don't have time to test all the different boards that are available, nor do I have the hardware. So we do rely on the community just to step forward and help us test.
So, Paul, this was all great information. In fact, would you mind sharing a lot of? So it looks like Peter is sharing the link to the mailing list that you mentioned. But if you could share the IRC channel that you were talking about, the Freenode meeting, and then the Bugzilla link as well.
Definitely.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, from the people I know in QA, I've heard it's very stressful at times to have all these bugs coming in and having to work with basically multiple parallels all the time.
And I mean, the ARM mailing, there are things like Bugzilla and various other places can be quite daunting at first. So the ARM mailing list, which I provided the link for, and the Fedora ARM IRC channel are always good spots to start asking questions if you're unsure of where best, a problem needs to go. So, like, if you're unsure, just come and ask. I'm generally around. I sit there with an IRC proxy. So if I'm sleeping or what have you, sort of, come along and hang around. Don't ask a question and instantly leave, because if you don't instantly get a question, there may not be people online at the time. I don't have much of a life, but I at least pretend to attempt to try and have one. So,
you're pretty much. You're one of those guys I can reach anytime on IRC.
So I have a question both for Paul and Peter. I know you guys, obviously, to the metal is the first place because you're going to get everything worked out. Are there any cloud solutions that you somewhat feel are stable, i.e. on Docker Hub, Amazon, Google, any of the, the VMs they have, or do you feel they're close enough?
We have on the Lonardo developer cloud, we have the latest Fedora 26 images there available for consumption. As soon as we go into the F27 cycle, they will get, alpha or beta, depending on what images are made available there. We produce OpenStack. So
can you post some of the URLs for this?
I certainly can. I don't have them right to hand, so I'll provide them to Robert so he can include links. But yes, we produce Docker images for ARM v7 and AART64, and they're pushed to places. I will also find out where they're pushed to for Robert when he does the blog post. We produce, libvirt compatible, so OpenStack and anything else compatible, 64-bit cloud images that are on some providers, and as more and more public ARM cloud bits become available, we're getting Fedora. So I'm hoping we should have Fedora before too long on Packet, the hosting provider where you can get bare metal 64-bit devices. So there's lots of different options there, and we're expanding those options, as quick as we possibly can, basically.
All right. So we're coming to the top of the hour. There's about 7 minutes left. I still have a few more announcements, but I want to first let everyone know that I did post the community forums points link in the chat with today's code, which is Open Fedora, all caps. That doesn't really matter, but Open Fedora is the code. Fill out that, get your community points. Before we move on to the rest of the announcements, I just want to make sure that everything's covered here. Again, like Peter just mentioned, I will be writing a blog. I'll be pushing that out hopefully by the beginning of next week, no later. So if anything, I'll share the link next week in next week's open hours. But Peter, Paul, is there anything else that you guys would like to add to this? Something that we might have missed, that we didn't ask you, that you'd like to mention?
I'd like to ask a question.
Oh, Rafael, welcome back.
Yeah. Well, hi, Peter. I'd like to know if there is some specific support for IoT in Fedora, like using Fedora not just to build a 6LoWPAN gateway, but also using Fedora in some very inexpensive ARM devices. So you could have a sensor or endpoint running Fedora for IoT.
That is in process, and in actual fact, that is actually part of my day job. And over the coming months, you will see more about that. I was hoping to have some bits and pieces of that available as part of Fedora 26. It will be available on Fedora 26 in the next couple of months. I've had a few sort of lower level dependencies that have caused me some issues, and also just a complete and utter lack of time. So there's been a few rabbit holes I've gone down to fix a few bits and pieces. Obviously, support for 64-bit devices is fairly important in there. We already support, some IoT-related devices fairly well. Improving support. So we have initial support for things like device tree overlay for some devices in Fedora 26. I need to document that so that people can start to play around with that more. But IoT is certainly going to be a focus over the next, the coming months, particularly for me, and you'll see more about that. So certainly,
okay.
And if you're interested in helping out, I am more than interested in assisting you getting involved.
Yes, we are very interested. Thanks.
So I'm not going to stop the recording if questions keep coming in, and it looks like there's some more coming up here. Now, it looks like Paul was willing to release his email. Oh, there you go, PB Robinson at Redhat also. You can find them on IRC as well, which I think is almost better than emails in my opinion. But David from Mini Nodes, who we talked to a few weeks ago, and I want to share that video too, since you did speak up here. But we'll share that link. He asks, are there plans for high key images to be made available? And I think that they did say there were some images that were already made that can be used. But this leads me into another question, and that when these images do become available for these 96 boards, is there a place that you're going to be hosting pre-built images, or will this all be build Flash images?
They will be pre-hosted and pushed out to the Fedora Mirror network.
Okay.
Great. And so my understanding, it wasn't me who tested it. I do have the original Hikey board here, I've had issues with flashing a firmware onto it. So if I don't get that working before Flock in a couple of weeks' time, Robert, I hope you bring all the bits needed to help me get that working.
Wait, so what bits am I supposed to bring? I missed that last part.
Well, I've got console on that. I'll just need your assistance in actually getting a working firmware on the on my Hikey board.
I'll do my best.
so to answer the question on Hikey, the test images that we produced for Fedora 26, if you have Tiano Core, should boot, I believe, directly.
Okay, and David also mentioned, he says, I can help testing as well. So if you're not familiar with David Tischler, he actually runs a site, or I want to say a company called Mini Nodes, and he runs these little mini servers on 96 boards, along with other ARM SBCs. But yeah,
I wasn't aware of David directly. I know at least the Mini Nodes Twitter handle follows me. I don't know whether that's attached to David or not.
I think it is.
Yes. So I am more that I would love to help you get them running and have Fedora there.
Awesome. Making connections. Cool. So there we go. We have hopefully eventually now some Fedora-based mini nodes coming up, maybe in the future. That would be exciting.
That is very exciting.
Yes. Cool. So now back to this, unless I keep turning the chat off and then something comes up. But yeah, so Sarah is sharing some of the links that were provided earlier in the episode. Did you, once again, Peter, Paul, any last things you'd like to contribute here or say before we close out?
Just if you're interested in Fedora on ARM, come and join us. There's all sorts of things from low-level kernel stuff to testing and documentation and packaging. If you want to come and scratch an itch and get involved, reach out. There's all sorts of things. So you can obviously consume as a Fedora user, or you can, become a contributor as well. The more the merrier.
And Paul, thank you. And Paul, are you good?
Yeah, that sums up nicely. Drop by Frino. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, to both of you, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy days to spend it with us here on Open Hours. We're very grateful for the opportunity to have you on here, and you're always welcome back anytime. I would hope that if you are available for any lingering questions, sometimes we get them in the following week. So next week, maybe if you'd stop by for the first 5 or 10 minutes, one of you, just in case something is addressed.
Absolutely.
Well, that'd be awesome. And so again, everyone, keep an eye out for that blog. So I'm going to do some now closing announcements, if that's okay. Good. And if more questions pop up, we'll address those. After this, we go into an after hours segment where people kind of just hang around. I pour myself another cup of coffee and we go off the record, right? But so last bits of announcements here. I just did post the link. This is something I'm going to start doing. It's the link for the invite for next week's episode, I hope. So if you click that, it should prompt your Google Calendar to pop up. And next week's episode is something that we've had in the pipeline for a long time. We're going to be speaking with the folks, and I mentioned this already once before, which got canceled due to unextenuating circumstances. But we're going to be speaking with the folks from Monero and Kovri. So Monero and Kovri, Monero is a cryptocurrency that you might have heard of, similar to Bitcoin or Ethereum, but they use an I2P service they call Kovri. The developers for Kovri and Monero will be with us next week on Open Hours. Now, the interesting thing about this is that they are developing on 96 boards. And so we'll be talking to them about how they use 96 boards for their cryptocurrency development. And this is the first of its kind since I've heard of it. And I think that it's very interesting. So I hope you all will join us for that. Now, for those of you who are interested in the winners of the Lonardo Connect. Now, this was a really tough one, and it's still even going to be tough. So I'm going to talk offline with all of the names that I mentioned right now, right? Because these are the people that were essentially candidates. And I would declare first prize, second prize, third prize. Instead, I'm going to talk offline with all these people. They are all in the running for this. But essentially, it's going to depend on whether or not anyone is capable of actually making it to San Francisco. So we will be talking with Ragnar. We will be talking with Sahaj Sarup. We will be talking with John Mark, Anthony E., and Michael Welling. So these are the 5 names that I've picked by pulling statistics from our forums, from OpenHours, from IRC channel, from social media networks, from every single community aspect that I could reach out to and get some sort of quantized number from. These folks were all involved at very high levels. And it all added up to being these 5 folks, right? So I will be reaching out. Hopefully one of you will be able to make it to connect with us, and we'll be working on that together. That is, I believe, all I have, unless I missed some sort of announcement. Will anyone speak up now? Yes, congratulations to all the winners. Absolutely. Thank you, Cesar. Yeah. Okay, one thing from Todd, he says, post the Freenode channel they hang out in, and there you go. Yeah, so Peter also hangs out in 96Boards and OpenHours. Please join our channel. Actually, it's been a lot of fun in there. Great. On to After Hours. Thank you so much for joining us. Once again, Peter, Paul from Redhat, working on Fedora project around 96Boards. Next week, Monero and Kovri on 96Boards, cryptocurrency. We'll see you next time. Recording out.